It is the day after the big Modi-Trump meeting at the White House. There's been a lot of common ground that's been achieved by both principals, both leaders. There are some niggling issues as well, which will need some sorting. Lots of defense and strategic cooperation, cooperation on AI, cooperation on cutting-edge new technologies. All of this has been promised. India, of course, has promised to buy more American oil and American weapons. Two things that President Trump had mentioned, not just yesterday when they met at the White House, but even after the phone call back in January. America has agreed to extradite one of the key plotters of the 26/11 Mumbai attacks, Tahawur Rana, who had exhausted all his legal options in the United States. The Prime Minister, while sharing space with President Trump at a press conference, even came up with a new acronym. Just like MAGA for Make in America Great Again, MEGA for Make India Great Again. And he said that MAGA plus MEGA is equal to a mega partnership. While there was a lot of bonhomie, there was a lot of candor, it was like two old friends catching up, there were some thorns in the relationship as well. There is no getting around the discomfort of the reciprocal tariffs, which President Trump announced on the very same day, in fact, just a few hours before the Prime Minister reached the White House. And this is expected to affect India, as well as other countries who are major exporters into the United States: Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and the European Union. How does India navigate this? And we'll also assess the impact of this visit this early in the Trump 2.0 term. Let's first listen in to some excerpts of the sound bites of both the Prime Minister and the President in that joint press conference that they had after what was an hour-long meeting between the two delegations.
अमेरिका के लोग राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप के मोटो मेक अमेरिका ग्रेट अगेन, भारत के लोग भी विरासत और विकास की पटरी पर विकसित भारत 2047 के दृढ़ संकल्प को लेकर तेज गति शक्ति से विकास की ओर अग्रसर है। अमेरिका की भाषा में कहूं तो विकसित भारत का मतलब मेक इंडिया ग्रेट अगेन, यानी मीगा। जब अमेरिका और भारत साथ मिलकर काम करते हैं, यानी मागा, मागा प्लस मीगा, तब बन जाता है मेगा पार्टनरशिप फॉर प्रॉस्पेरिटी। आज हमने द्विपक्षीय व्यापार को 2030 तक 2 गुना से भी अधिक बढ़ाकर $500 बिलियन तक पहुंचाने का लक्ष्य निर्धारित किया है। आतंकवाद के खिलाफ लड़ाई में भारत और अमेरिका दृढ़ता से साथ खड़े रहे हैं। हम सहमत हैं कि सीमा पार आतंकवाद के उन्मूलन के लिए ठोस कार्रवाई आवश्यक है। ये ह्यूमन ट्रैफिकिंग में जुड़े हुए पूरे इकोसिस्टम पर हमने वार करना चाहिए और अमेरिका और भारत मिलकर के हमारी कोशिश है और हमारी कोशिश रहनी चाहिए कि इस प्रकार की पूरी इकोसिस्टम को हमें जड़ मूल से नष्ट करना चाहिए ताकि ह्यूमन ट्रैफिकिंग बंद हो।
There's a fairness that I will charge a reciprocal tariff, meaning whatever countries charge the United States of America, we will charge them, no more, no less. In other words, they charge us a tax or tariff, and we charge them the exact same tax. India traditionally is the highest, just about the highest tariffed country. They charge more tariffs than any other country. And, I mean, we'll be talking about that, but again, whatever they charge us, we're charging them. So it works out very well. It's a beautiful, simple system.
All right, so let me take you through the 5 big takeaways from the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump. India and the United States have agreed to increase their bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030. If you add goods and services, last year it finished at 190, so they're talking about more than doubling by the end of the decade. Taking a leaf out of Trump's Make America Great Again slogan, Prime Minister Modi said that Viksit Bharat means MEGA or Make India Great Again, and together this would become a mega partnership for prosperity. President Trump also said that they would be paving the way ultimately for providing India with the F-35 stealth fighter jet, the ultimate fifth-generation fighter jet. India currently does not have a fifth-generation fighter. New procurements and co-production arrangements have also been mentioned in the joint statement, both for the Javelin anti-tank guided missiles as well as for the Stryker infantry combat vehicles. India will also procure 6 more Poseidon P-8I naval patrol and reconnaissance aircraft. Also, amid the reciprocal tariffs, which of course was announced just a few hours before the White House visit, President Trump said that India and the US have reached an important agreement on energy that will restore the US as the leading supplier of oil and gas to India. Remember, since the Russia-Ukraine war began, Russia has displaced the United States for the last couple of years as India's leading oil and gas supplier. Both leaders also stressed on the need to combat terror unitedly. In fact, President Trump announced his administration has approved the extradition of 2611 Mumbai attacks convict Tahawur Rana to India. And to deepen the people-to-people ties, 2 new Indian consulates will also be opened up in the United States, one in Los Angeles and the other in Boston. And American educational institutions have also been invited to open offshore campuses right here in India. I want to first go across to Mr. Mukesh Aghi. He's the President and CEO of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. We'll also be joined by an extended panel right after Mr. Aghi. But let me start with you, Mr. Aghi, first. First, your big, broad takeaways from the meeting itself. It seemed, very businesslike. Of course, there was a lot of bonhomie, a lot of camaraderie between the two principals, the Prime Minister and the President. But at the same time, this meeting seemed like President Trump wanted to get his important agenda items ticked off, and certainly tariffs were one big agenda item for him. The fact that he announced that just a couple of hours before the PM landed up there. What do you make of the visit itself first, and then I'll come to the specifics?
A very successful visit, a very focused, substantial agenda, and the outcome and the roadmap tied to milestones was very, very elaborate. You have to understand that the focus was on the defense. Focus was on partnership, innovation, and technology. Focus was on basically trade and economic agenda. But more important is they agreed more in every aspect. Yes, tariff was highlighted a lot, but to me that's a small aspect of the journey these two countries are taking. Having a $500 billion trade by 2030, having a bilateral trade agreement by fall of this year. I think those are milestones set up by the two to make sure countries are moving together in the right direction.
But Mr. Aghi, how easy or difficult is it going to be to have a bilateral trade agreement in 6 months' time? I mean, India and the UK have been negotiating for an FTA for God knows 10 years now. Same with India and the European Union. It's easier said than done. Even when Trump was in his first term, there was this limited trade deal that was agreed upon. Both sides had given their in-principle agreement to it. And then at the last minute, the Americans pulled out.
It's possible, Zaka. When you look at, pick up the old mini trade deal, which was done between Trump administration and Modi administration, and start from that and expand on that. And I believe within the next 6 months, it can be achieved because all you're doing is adding other components to the framework which was agreed upon early on. Because the bigger challenge is always the framework, not the content of apples and pomegranates and everything else. So I think it's doable. And if both sides stay focused, it will be done when Trump comes in and he can sign it.
I do want to, as they say in trade deals, the devil is always in the detail. Just help our viewers understand why President Trump is obsessed about this idea of reciprocal tariffs. I mean, I'm looking at some of the leading items. On oilseeds, fats and oils, India charges 60% tariff, the US charges 7%. On meat and live animals, India charges 32% tariff, US charges 2%. Leather goods, 15% India, 4% US. Textiles, 16% India, 8% US. Now, the way a developing country like India views this is, look, we've got to protect our farmers, we've got to protect our small leather tanneries, we've got to protect our small apparel makers, and therefore we have these high tariffs. Otherwise, our markets are going to get flooded. How does the government of India reconcile to reciprocal tariffs? I mean, how do they reconcile to textiles at 8%, leather at 4%, and meat and live animals at 2%?
So you have to look at it from Trump's perspective. U.S. has a $1 trillion trade deficit, and he's looking at top 10 countries, which basically makes 90% of that trade deficit, starting with China and the European Union, and India is number 9 in the top 10 itself. And I believe that India can basically wipe out their trade surplus with U.S. by buying more energy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what was discussed. So I think from a trade imbalance perspective, the balance can be brought up in a very, very short notice. Now, what really happens is on the reciprocity, basically what we have to look at is what each country is charging. And I think you can, as you get into the trade deal, make certain exceptions to make sure you're able to protect each other's farmers. You're able to protect each other's low-end industry itself. So it is not a cardinal rule that you have to have tit for tat as far as the trade tariff goes. You can work through the process, and that's why I think they opened a bilateral trade deal to bring in some of the differences and make sure that both countries are successful.
And one final word before we let you go, and this is specifically on the defense side. So the F-35, although there's no mention of the F-35 in the joint statement, the President did mention that ultimately we want to provide the F-35 to India. I think that was a big announcement. Of course, the Strikers and the Javelins, there is one line about co-production, but we don't know the details. The joint statement is a little sparse on that. Could you elaborate on why this is a big deal? Because a lot of people were saying, oh, Mr. Trump is just going to make it very transactional, so on and so forth. But F-35 is right up there. It's state of the art. It's probably the best 5th generation fighter aircraft in the world right now.
So let me just first talk about Striker and Javelin.
Yeah.
These are the two components which both sides have agreed to co-produce in India itself. And we are already making components for Javelin in Hyderabad. And so the Striker, which is the high terrain vehicle, will start building that also. So I think co-production is a critical importance. So you have a technology transfer and creating local manufacturing. In regards to F-35, it's early, but the message is very clear that it's not just the 5th generation fighter plane. Any technology India wants, our US is ready to provide that, whatever the market prices are. So I think that is a major shift. And if you look at the joint statement, they talked about the ITAR, where basically the export regulation, and they are going to streamline, especially the India status with the US itself. So I think you will see more simplification process of complex technology moving to India under Trump administration.
All right, Mr. Aghi, thank you so much for joining us at the top of Brass Tacks, and thank you for your perspective on all of these issues. There's a lot that's been packed in by both the principals, both the Prime Minister and the President. Let's try and open this up to our guests who are now joining us. Vivek Kaju is former Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. Mr. Vivek Vadva is one of the most well-known entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. Welcome to the broadcast. Professor Brahmachalani, Strategic Affairs expert, is also joining us on the broadcast. Before I just come to our guests, I want to bring that table. We didn't have time at the top to show that table. This is basically, if you were to look at the top 5 items traded by India and traded by the United States in terms of the tariffs, right? Here we go. Beverages and tobacco. India tariffs stat at 75%, almost 75%. The United States at 17.5%. Oilseeds, fats and oil, 60% India, 7.1% the United States. That's a differential of 53%. So it's 53% costlier to buy oilseeds, fats or oils here in India if it's something that's imported from the United States, and it's 53% cheaper to buy Indian oil in the United States. Same's the case with meat and live animals. 32% is the tariff that India charges. The United States 2%. There's a differential of 30%. Now, here's the thing. The Indian government's contention, and this is true for most developing countries, is we have farmers to protect. I mean, if we're going to import US meat and US live animals at 2% duty, why would people buy Indian meat and Indian produce? That's why you have the high tariff. Similarly, with leather, again, a lot of leather is produced by these small tannery units. You drive down from Noida, where we are, towards Lucknow, all the way up, Kanpur and all of those places have these tanneries. India charges 15% tariffs on imported leather. The tariff by the US is 4%. Textiles, 16% tariffs by India, 8% by the United States. So if you were to balance it out, then the fear is that there would be, tons of these imported commodities being dumped into India, because India is a huge market. So that's the concern. Let me now open this up. Let's ask Professor Kaju this first. Ambassador Kaju this first. Mr. Trump has made it very clear. Reciprocity, what you charge as tariff, we will charge as tariff. What may this mean? And he said, friend or foe, it doesn't matter to me. This is a system he believes has been ripping America off. How does India navigate that?
I think it will be extremely complex. The navigation for precisely the reasons that you mentioned. I think it also goes against the grain of what has been the very basis of international trade for the last 6 to 7 decades, that developing countries have special needs. They have sections of their populations to protect, especially in agriculture, textiles, and these are areas with very large employments. And India is the world's largest country by population, and therefore, I think President Trump has shown a remarkable degree of insensitivity. I'm sorry to use the word on this issue, but I think it's also part of his persona. Let's face it; he is not a traditional political leader. He has a constituency which has supported him to make this remarkable political journey, which has seen him back in the White House, and he has those people's interests and to protect.
Okay.
And he has to show that to the to his people, to his supporters, that he is playing the game by the rules that they would like him to play by. So I think we are heading into a very difficult time, especially on trade. On other issues, on strategic issues, again,
Yeah, I'll just
think
come to that, Ambassador Kaju. We have time on the show, so I'll come to the strategic part in just 1 second. Let me get Mr. Wadhwa and Professor Chalani also to weigh in on the trade part, because I think that is fundamentally the headline, and it's not India specific, Mr. Wadhwa. This is for every country. It's for China, it's for Canada, it's for Mexico, friend and foe alike, as the president said. The United States is going to charge reciprocal tariffs for every item that's going to come through. Now, here's perhaps the silver lining, and that is there is a period between now and April 1 for individual countries to try and negotiate with the United States. There's also, in the case of India, as was announced by both the leaders yesterday, time till fall. So let's say till September of this year, when President Trump has to come to India for the Quad Summit, time to agree upon a bilateral trade deal. I asked Mr. Aghi this. I mean, trade deals take years. India has been negotiating with the UK for close to a decade, I think now, on an FTA. How can you find common ground for even a limited trade deal in 6 months? Is it possible? And can India use that carrot to negate the stick of these reciprocal tariffs?
Dhaka, what I would say is 2 things. Number one, maybe reducing the tariffs in India is a good thing, because Indian industry needs to compete. Yes, the farmers might need some protection, but American goods aren't that cheap anyway. And it's time to get beyond the days of socialism, when everything in India was closed and protected, and government 5-year plans and all this nonsense, which held India back. So it may actually be doing India a favor by getting it to rip down its barriers, its regulations, and open up a little bit. The second thing is, you got to realize Trump is a negotiator. I mean, he's talking about Canada becoming America's 51st state. He was talking about shutting down Mexico and so on. These are all negotiating points. He wanted to take over the Panama Canal. He wants to take over Denmark and Greenland and God knows what else. This is Trump's style. So he's starting off, with his negotiating position, and this will basically whip the Indians into shape and they'll negotiate something sensible, which will be a win-win for both countries. So I'm not flustered about this at all. I think it's a good thing for both countries.
But can I just press you on that?
May I make a comment here?
Yeah.
Look, what is this language? Whip the Indians into shape.
Well,
Is this the kind of language that
this is
panelists
politics.
have used? I mean, what is this? Whip the Indians into shape? Are we some kind of animals that we've got to be whipped into shape?
No, because he whips his own
Professor
people into shape
Wadhwa, I
also.
expect you to use language which is civilized. I'm sorry to use that word.
Okay.
This is negotiating. This is Trump's
No,
style.
you don't whip people into shape.
He's ripping the
This is
government
not
apart.
acceptable to India, this kind of language.
Okay.
And this is precisely the point I was trying to make.
Fair enough.
I'm sorry, you can get upset about it, but I'm talking metaphorically over here. It's negotiating.
Can I just press you on that? Because what I want to understand, Mr. Wadhwa, is, okay, if India is able to, lessen the trade surplus it has with the United States by buying oil or buying, defense equipment or what have you, do you reckon Trump might, make some exemptions for India when it comes to this whole business of reciprocal tariffs, particularly on issues which concern farmers, for example, which is a big constituency here in India? No political party can afford to alienate them.
Zaka, of course he will. This is Trump's negotiating style, that he beats up the opposition and he takes a very strong stance, and then he steps back and quietly negotiates something. In the meantime, he declares victory and everyone is happy. That's the way it works here. Maybe I shouldn't have used the word whip, but it's still, beating his opponents into shape. That's what the guy does. And his style is working. Right now, they're doing the same thing with Doji. They're ripping apart the entire American government. They're burning the entire hierarchy to the ground so they can grow again. That's what's going on in America, and it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing because it was badly needed. He's also now eliminating U.S. aid and all the backstabbing that used to happen under the Biden administration and previous administrations. Even under Trump 1, while Trump and India were having good negotiations, you had the agencies trying to get the government kicked out. All of this happening under the covers. So Trump is cleaning house and whipping his own country into shape also. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Okay, so can I ask Professor Brahmachalani that? I mean, ultimately, there's also a view, and to be fair, that this trade protectionism is basically to protect your, indigenous industries. If they need to compete, at the end of the day, you have to open up. That's what we've done in technology. That's what we've done in the banking system. You can name any number of sectors. Anything that's been opened up to competition has actually done better, and Indian companies have actually thrived. But when it comes to some of these, sectors like leather and textiles, etc., protectionism is actually, rewarding in some form, not a high level of competence. Do you buy that argument that this could actually be a good thing for Indian industry, that they will up their game, as it were? Or do you think this is going to fundamentally upend the rules of the trading order as we know it?
Zaka, protectionism is on the rise in the West, in Europe, in North America. Populism means protectionism. This is what Trump has embraced. He wants India to open up while he becomes more protectionist. But as Mr. Wadhwa said, Trump employs tactics, negotiating tactics, that he first outlined in his 1987 book, The Art of the Deal, in which he said that you can advance your negotiating goals through some flattery, and we saw that in the news conference. He called Modi a tougher negotiator than me, just the way a few days earlier, when the Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba came calling, he said Ishiba is a stronger leader than I would wish he was. So he blends some flattery, some cajoling, with hardball tactics, including threats and coercion. So we saw in the last 24 hours that Trump, while being sweet and nice, he has lived up to his reputation as a clever businessman who likes to drive a hard bargain. He is quite serious about wiping out America's trade deficits. The problem for India is this, that India has trade deficit with the rest of the world but a trade surplus with the US.
Yep.
So to erase that trade surplus with the US would mean buying 40 to 50 billion dollars worth of more American goods. As it is, the trade deficit of India, or the overall trade deficit of India, makes up more than between 10 to 12% of India's GDP annually. It weighs down India significantly in the economic realm. In comparison, America's overall trade deficit with the world, even though it's much larger than India's overall trade deficit, makes up only less than 4% of America's GDP. So India's trade deficit is already very onerous.
Okay.
And Trump expects India, and he said in his opening statement at the news conference that he expects India to buy many billions dollars worth of defense equipment just this year. The question is, where is the room for India economically? As it is, you mentioned, Zaka, that India has these very high tariffs on a number of items. That's true. But we should not forget that India's average tariff rate on imports from America has declined to less than 5%. This is what the New York Times reported. And more importantly, when Trump talks about reciprocal tariffs, the US does not import the same goods from India that India imports from the US. So what does reciprocity here mean? How will they apply reciprocal tariffs when India's imports from the US are dominated by three things: hydrocarbons, weapons, and gems? And on those three items, on hydrocarbons, the tariffs are negligible. On gems, again, they are quite reasonable. So you're looking at small items like leather or apples, gives you a distorted picture of India's tariff regime.
Okay.
And this whole concept of reciprocal tariffs is going to be very hard to implement for the US.
So, what they call general weighted average tariff as per WTO norms. For India, it's 9.5. For the United States, it's 3%. But then, of course, the US economy is probably 10 times bigger than the Indian economy.
Zaka, I was talking about the average tariff rate of India in relation to imports from the US.
For the US, okay.
That has come down to less than 5%.
So let me go back to Ambassador. I want to now move on to the defense and the energy part. Clearly, Trump views both defense and energy as a way to balance out the trade. Now, on the defense part, of course, the headline was him saying in the press conference that ultimately we want to give India the F-35. What is that motivated by? Is it because the Chinese recently unveiled their 6th-generation fighter and India does not currently have a 5th-generation fighter? So do you see that being the motivation? And two, the mention in the joint statement about the production of the Javelins and the Strikers and India ordering 6 more Poseidon naval patrol aircraft and so on. There was a concern that Trump is viewing defense more from a transactional point of view and less from a strategic point of view. Has that concern been addressed with what he's offered India to buy?
I think, Zaka, you've made a very significant point on how does Trump look at defense. Is it transactional or is it strategic? I've thought that it's a mixture of both. He does understand the importance of India in US strategic calculations, and that he would like India to be part of, it won't be a US system of alliances because India will never be an ally, but part of the US system of partnerships, if I may use that. But at the same time, he is transactional. He wants India to buy more US defense equipment and expensive US defense equipment. Now, the question is, India is, of course, perhaps the world's largest importer of defense equipment, but we have a certain traditional partners from where we acquire defense. High technology defense equipment, we are purchasing gradually from the West. The question is whether we can be hastened here. I don't know whether that would be possible. And that may be an area of friction. But I'm sure that in this, perhaps the defense establishment in the United States might be able to temper Trump. I know that Trump at the moment is going through the American system like a whirlwind with his crony Elon Musk. But at the end of the day, it's been my experience that all bureaucracies in the world have a way of managing their politicians and people like Elon Musk.
Okay.
And the American bureaucracy, believe me, will be no different.
Okay. That's an interesting
No, the American
side
bureaucracy has
note.
woken up
Yeah,
and realized
Mr. Wadhwa
the
wanted
American
to comment on
bureaucracy has
that.
realized they're in trouble. I mean, they're in a state of shock. They're being
Oh,
ripped apart, department
these
after department, firing after firing.
Mr. Wadhwa, I can assure you the shock and awe won't last for a long time. At the end
Let's
of
watch
the
and see.
day, the American system will not work without bureaucracies, without their
They will cut
bureaucracy,
it
and
down
Trump will
dramatically.
learn this soon enough. If a state is not a company, that
Okay.
is the first thing that has to be understood.
So here's the
Well,
thing. So Mr.
let's
Wadhwa,
watch and see because I'm hopeful that they're going to rip it down to shreds, and it'll be a
Well,
model for India because
I'm
India needs to
sorry
go
to
and
say
do twice as
you
much.
and I share the same name. If I may call you Vivek, you can call me Vivek. Vivek W. You are in for a shock. You will be in for a
okay.
shock.
Let's watch and see.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But Mr. Wadhwa, the thing is, so it's a bit like this. Trump is saying, you can buy F-35s. It's the state of the art, perhaps the best stealth fighter in the world right now, because that means more dollars for my companies, American companies. Or is he saying, I'm allowing you to buy the F-35s because you have a problem with China? Because he didn't say particularly not very nice things about China yesterday in the press conference. In fact, he seemed pretty charitable towards China.
I think what's important over here is that he's elevating the partnership with India. He's offering the most advanced technologies, and also he knows that he has to rein in his own defense department. And to the extent that they can start producing in India, which is I'm sure is going to start happening, it'll reduce costs of American equipment, and there'll be a lot of technology transfer. So they're thinking strategically. He's only been in office for a few weeks now. The people, his people haven't had a chance to sit down and work out the details with the Indian government. Over the next few months, you're going to see them working it out. And I think that he set the stage here, saying that India gets the most advanced technologies. We want India buying from the US, not from Russia, because this is about Russia at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Rather than buying the antiquated, equipment, you've seen it falling apart in Ukraine. All of their hardware and so on. It's a piece of garbage. It's antiquated. Well, if India can get the most advanced American equipment and be producing a lot of it in India itself, it's a win-win. That's where this is headed.
So, Brahmacharani, again, even on the question of oil and energy imports, it was only after the war in Ukraine began that India started importing so much oil from Russia. Obviously, it was being offered at a much discounted price. Now, Trump is coming and saying there was a time before the war began where US was the #1 supplier to India of oil and gas. We want to go back to that. Again, is he viewing it purely as a businessman would? Like, you were buying stuff from me 3 years ago, a war happened, I'll stop that war, now you start buying my oil again.
First, he's a businessman, a deal maker, and he means what he says. He also knows that India is susceptible to pressure. The US became the #1 supplier of oil and petroleum products to India during Trump's first term because of Trump's pressure on India. So from 2019, there was a spike in Indian purchases of American oil and petroleum products for 4 years in a row until the Russian invasion of Ukraine opened up cheaper oil for India. Now, when he says that he wants India to erase its trade surplus with the US, he means business. And that's the real challenge for India now, as to how do we actually reduce the trade surplus with the US. As far as weapons are concerned, on energy, let me say one thing, that the US does not offer any discounts on its oil and petroleum products.
Yep.
I'm not talking of Russia's discounted oil, but even long-term contracts that India signs with, let's say, with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar for LNG, come with discounts. But the Americans don't offer discounts. So every $1 difference in oil price for India translates into many millions of dollars of extra expenditure per day, as the the International Energy Agency in Paris has said, that India today is now the world's largest source of oil demand. So every $1 difference makes a big difference, for India's economy. The second thing about weapons, and the F-35 offer is not an offer. There is no offer as such. It's ultimately they're going to offer it. Right now they're dangling the carrot. But India is not only the world's largest importer of military arms. India accounts for nearly 10% of the global trade in arms. So India is the more conventional weapons India imports, the more insecure it feels, because today's war has changed. You look at the threats that India has faced. For example, the Chinese encroachments into eastern Ladakh.
Yeah.
They took place without a shot being fired. Or look at the Ukraine war. What has the Ukraine war revealed? That the air power is not about fighter jets. Air power is really about missiles and drones.
Drones now, yeah.
So missiles and drones have been the most pivotal in the Ukraine war.
Okay.
So we need to look at air power a bit differently. Not looking at buying these expensive toys, even if they are offered to us. We need to look at how we can actually create the base at home to meet our defense needs.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Professor Chalani, Mr. Wadhwa, Ambassador Kaju. Thank you for joining us and putting your views into perspective as to what you make of the big visit by Prime Minister Modi to the White House. I also want to go across to Nirupama Rao, former Foreign Secretary to the Government of India. Ma'am, from the joint statement, and it reads into about 30-35 paragraphs, what are your big takeaways from what's been agreed upon by both sides?
Well, what stands out in the joint statement is the fact that we had assumed this all along, that there is a very positive continuum in this relationship, and it has been taken further forward as a result of this visit. There are various factors which I'd like to talk about as this discussion goes forward. But you look at the defense partnership, you look at what is happening on the energy security front, the reopening really of the prospects of cooperation in nuclear technology, for instance, and new frontiers in technology, whether it's space technology, augmented technology, undersea technology, and the effort to create new compacts defined literally by trust between the two countries. All these are very positive takeaways. Of course, there have been discussions on trade and on tariffs and obviously on immigration too. These are all givens in the relationship, but the overall matrix in which this relationship is embedded marks for and speaks of strategic convergence.
So you mentioned trade and tariffs, and we've been talking about it in the earlier part of the program as well. The fact that the announcement of the reciprocal tariffs just hours ahead of the bilateral, did that kind of sour the pitch? And how does now India navigate this whole threat of reciprocal tariffs?
Well, I think that despite the signing into effect of these reciprocal tariffs being applied to all countries by President Trump, I do believe that we had sufficient premonition that such a move was more than likely, given President Trump's vociferous championing of tariffs as a weapon in trade, and that America would not stand for unequal trading relations, which they consider as a quote-unquote rip-off with other countries. So we weren't exactly blown off course by this announcement, and I feel that this should spur India on to rationalize our own trade policies, knowing where give and take is needed and where the interests of our economic development and the needs of our population are not affected. So there's no doubt that India is one of the target countries of the new measures.
Yep.
While the US trade-weighted average tariff is 2.2% according to the WTO, India's average rate is 12% and reaches, in fact, I believe, 177% for oilseeds, fats, and oils. But the US, of course, also uses trade defense instruments, as for instance, during import surges. So it's no saint either. Now,
All right.
India is expected now to increase its imports of US gas and oil that can help address the adverse trade balance that the US has with India. And increased purchases of defense equipment and defense systems are another area which can help reduce the imbalance.
So on that question of defense, there's been an announcement about the F-35. I mean, it was not there in the joint statement. It was mentioned in the press conference. The Strikers, the Javelins, the Poseidon P-8Is. Do you see Trump again sort of making this case to India, buy American weapons? It makes business sense for him to push that case. Or is he viewing it from the strategic threat that China is for India much more than it is for the United States? Because, we've seen evidence of that in the last 4 years since Galwan happened. Is Trump on the same page about the strategic threat that China is, and therefore the offer of these weapons?
I really don't believe there are any fundamental differences between the US and India in this regard. Of course, the context in which US-China relations are placed and the context in which India-China relations are placed may not exactly coincide, but that doesn't point to fundamental differences in approach. And Mr. Trump has, of course, announced at the outset of his new presidency that he wants to be a peacemaker, that he wants to bridge divides, that he wants to reconcile differences. So that seems to be the overall philosophy that he's tried to articulate. We'll have to see, of course, how this is actually implemented and how this plays out. He hasn't as yet met with either Mr. Putin or Mr. Xi Jinping. Let's see how the chemistry and the content of those discussions move forward. For this moment, I will say that Mr. Modi's visit if I can talk a little about the visit, I think it's been quite a masterclass in diplomacy. And Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi, has practiced this diplomacy quite deftly. He was able to combine Make America Great Again with Make India Great Again, and he created this new equation, which he called the mega partnership for peace and prosperity between the two democracies. So all this speaks of common ground and of commonalities between two democracies that have come together and have over the years built a very substantive, comprehensive global partnership.
All right, Nirupama Rao, thank you very much for joining us and putting into perspective what the visit's big takeaways are.